7th-century Arabia was a landscape defined by absolute, violent decentralization. There was no sovereign state, no centralized authority, and no geopolitical borders. This society operated under the framework of the Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. Survival was tied to Asabiyyah, a system of absolute tribal loyalty where justice was extracted through infinite cycles of collective blood vengeance. In this environment, there was no central rule of law. If you were stateless or belonged to a weak faction, you had no legal recourse. Your identity and your security were tied strictly to your bloodline. Prophet Muhammad introduced a system of constitutionalism and civic statecraft to this region that arrived over a millennium before the Geneva Conventions or the Westphalian system. This diplomatic transition replaced a geopolitical reality built on tribal anarchy with a framework governed by binding law. This structural shift laid the groundwork for fiqh al-siyar, the classical Islamic jurisprudence of international relations. Modern historical critics frequently dismiss the diplomatic treaties signed during this era as simple political opportunism, arguing that the resulting laws were retroactive narratives designed to justify a growing empire. To test these claims against the empirical record, we will evaluate 4 specific diplomatic milestones from the Medinan period. Analyzed strictly through the framework of orthodox Sunni jurisprudence, these engagements reveal a rigid application of constitutional law that prioritized the sanctity of contracts above tribal or political interest. In 622 CE, the Prophet migrated from Mecca to the oasis of Yathrib, a city later renamed Medina. He arrived in a region exhausted by over a century of fratricidal warfare between the dominant Arab tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj. Arriving as an invited arbitrator, he promulgated a legal document containing 47 specific clauses, known as the Constitution of Medina. This treaty bound the warring Arab factions and the oasis's Jewish tribes into a single civic entity called the Ummah. This table compares pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah with the new legal reality. The treaty replaced tribal immunity with state justice, holding criminals individually accountable regardless of lineage. It also established religious freedom. Jewish and Muslim tribes shared equal citizenship, with guaranteed autonomy over their respective faiths. The treaty mandated a strict mutual defense pact. Every signatory was legally obligated to defend Medina against foreign aggression and share the financial burden of war. Critics frequently point to the eventual execution of the combatants of the Jewish Banu Qurayza tribe as evidence that this treaty was a temporary ruse. The historical and legal record shows a different causal link. During the Battle of the Trench in 627 CE, the Banu Qurayza violated the core mutual defense clause by conspiring with the besieging Meccan army to break the siege from within the city walls. The punishment of the Banu Qurayza was the judicial execution of a mutual defense treaty, holding the tribe accountable for military treason rather than their religious identity. The rule of law had officially superseded tribal affiliation. In 628 CE, the Prophet led a congregation of 1,500 companions in the white garments of pilgrimage toward Mecca. The Meccan leadership intercepted them with cavalry, resulting in a tense standoff at the plain of Hudaybiyyah. To avoid bloodshed in the sacred precinct, the Prophet engaged in intense diplomatic negotiations, resulting in a 10-year truce. The Meccan envoys forced the Muslims to accept a series of asymmetrical clauses, including a mandate to return to Medina without completing their pilgrimage that year. The most controversial clause governed political defection. Any Meccan who defected to Medina without permission had to be extradited back to the Quraysh, while any Muslim who defected to Mecca would not be returned. Before the ink on this treaty was even dry, a Muslim defector named Abu Jandal emerged from Mecca. Having been imprisoned and tortured by his own father, the very man negotiating for the Meccans, he threw himself before the Muslims and begged for asylum. Despite the visible emotional agony of his followers, the Prophet honored the exact stipulations of the newly ratified document and returned Abu Jandal to his captors. This decision cemented the principle of pacta sunt servanda. In Islamic statecraft, adherence to a ratified treaty is a legal obligation that takes precedence over immediate geopolitical advantage. While some contemporaries and modern critics view this treaty as a sign of weakness, it was a strategic shift. By signing a bilateral agreement, the Meccan aristocracy recognized the Islamic State of Medina as an equal, sovereign political entity. The 10-year truce lifted the Iron Curtain of Meccan war propaganda. By mingling freely during peacetime, the strict legal integrity of the Muslims drove massive expansion, leading to more conversions in the following 2 years than in the previous 19 combined. By the year of deputations in 631 CE, the geopolitical map had shifted. A grand delegation of 60 Christian dignitaries and bishops traveled from Najran to ascertain the Prophet's political intentions toward the Christian world. The Prophet hosted these clergymen inside al-Masjid al-Nabawi, the spiritual epicenter of the Islamic State. When the time for their liturgy arrived, he permitted the Christians to conduct their prayers directly inside the mosque, a degree of religious accommodation absent in the neighboring Byzantine or Sassanid empires. The ensuing dialogue culminated in the Treaty of Najran. This legal covenant guaranteed the inviolability of Christian churches and properties, ensuring that no bishop or monk would be removed from their ecclesiastic position. This treaty introduces the jizya, a term frequently described as a tool for religious extortion. To understand its actual function, we have to look at the exact financial structure of the state, mapped out in this table. Muslim citizens were legally obligated to pay a mandatory zakat tax and faced compulsory military conscription. By contrast, the jizya was a strictly civic tax. In exchange, non-Muslim citizens were granted total exemption from combat, while women, children, and the elderly were completely exempt. The reciprocal nature of this contract was proven when the Muslim commander Abu Ubaidah occupied Homs. When a massive Byzantine army advanced and he could no longer guarantee the military defense of the Christian inhabitants, he ordered the complete refund of the jizya to the citizens. The jizya functioned as a civic defense contract, protecting minority populations from conscription while ensuring the state had the resources to safeguard its borders. In 632 CE, during his final pilgrimage, the Prophet stood before an immense congregation of over 100,000 pilgrims at Mount Arafat. In the farewell sermon, he systematically dismantled the social structure of the ancient world. He declared the life and property of every individual a sacred trust, abolished all pre-Islamic blood feuds, and banned the practice of usury. The sermon delivered a definitive strike against racial hierarchy. The Prophet explicitly declared that all of humanity shared a common ancestry, and that no race has inherent superiority over another. Some critics argue that these egalitarian concepts are modern inventions. They claim these declarations were retrospectively added by later scholars to align the religion with 20th century values. This critique ignores the science of isnad, the strict system of transmission verification that underpins Orthodox Islamic scholarship. The exact phrasing of these decrees was vetted through unbroken chains of eyewitnesses and recorded in classical texts like the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. The authenticated record confirms the Prophet's words. No Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, no white person has superiority over a black person, and no black person has superiority over a white person, except through piety. These universal human rights are not the product of modern apologetics. They are the verified foundation of the early Islamic legal code. In barely a decade, a peninsula's social structure transitioned from tribal blood feuds to a system defined by civic duty and the rule of law. When we evaluate the Constitution of Medina, the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, and the covenants with Christian minorities through the framework of fiqh al-siyar, the narrative of opportunistic warlordism is replaced by a consistent application of law. The early Islamic State succeeded by consistently elevating the sanctity of the written contract over the supremacy of the tribe, enforcing its laws regardless of the immediate political cost. By elevating the sanctity of the contract over the supremacy of bloodlines, these treaties established a legal architecture that redefined the basis of political belonging in the 7th century.